Welcome everyone to another SDEC session. Today's session is going to be in the topic area of Google Analytics. My name is Adam Greco, and I work for Search Discovery, and I'll be moderating behind the scenes here. A couple housekeeping items before I turn it over to our speaker. If you are new to the SDEC, we are a free educational community that provides weekly sessions related to topics, digital analytics, digital marketing, and so on. If you are listening to this webinar and you're not already a member, please look in the chat area after I'm done speaking, and there'll be some links there for you to officially join the SDEC. It's totally free, and the benefit of joining is that you'll get advanced notice of sessions like these, and you'll be invited to our SDEC Slack group where you can see over 50 past recordings related to multiple topics. If you have any questions or concerns in terms of getting into the Slack group or joining the SDEC, you'll see in the chat my information where you could email, and I'm happy to help you. And joining the Slack group takes literally 2 minutes. We only have about 2/3 of the folks in the SDEC in the Slack group. And if your company doesn't allow you to use Slack, we have workarounds where you can just use your mobile phone and join with a personal account that I can walk you through. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, just hit me up on the chat. If you have questions for Fred, we'll cover those at the end. Please use the Zoom Q&A instead of the chat. That makes it much easier for us to find the questions that you have and share those with Fred. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome back Fred Pike. This is actually his second time presenting for the SDEC. So thank you so much, Fred, for continuing to share your wisdom and knowledge. And we're going to hand it off to you to learn more about GA4 versus GA3. So thanks so much, Fred. And you're on mute, so you'll have to unmute.
There, I probably sound better unmuted. Actually, maybe not, I'm not sure. But Adam, thank you so much. Great to be back here with SDEC. And I didn't realize I was supposed to bring wisdom, but hopefully, now that you tell me, I'll try to do a little bit of that. All right, so today we're going to be talking a little bit about GA4 and GA3, particularly some of the events in GA3 and in GA4, and what you should do with those GA3 events. We'll also touch on some things about GA4 in general, which is kind of a hot new topic that everybody's interested in. All right, so starting. So my name is Fred Pike. I'm a managing director at Northwoods in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We are a digital agency and a software dev shop, have about 40 people here, and I lead up the GA and GTM practice area. So most of actually about all the client work I do is around GA, GTM, measurement, things like that. So it's a fun gig. What we're going to do today is talk about some of the differences. We're going to start off with some of the differences between GA3 and GA4, and then dive a little bit into the GA4 event types, spending particular time with the recommended events. Then we're going to look at the UA events. And if you're a good analyst, you probably have some nice GA3 or UA events set up. And the question is like, okay, what the heck to do with all of those? How do I import them into GA4? If they were really good in GA3, what do I do in GA4? And we're going to follow an example to kind of walk that down. And there's, I think, 8 different steps that we'll follow to try to help you make that transition and figure out what should be transitioned. So starting off really elementary with some of the differences between GA3 and GA4. In GA3 or in UA, you know, everybody calls it GA3, so I'll do that too. It's really universal analytics. But in GA3, there are different types of hit types. You have a page view, you've got events, you've got social, you've got transaction e-commerce, which I'm sure is a big thing for many of you. You have timing, you have exceptions, which is actually a hit type I don't think I've ever used, but it does exist. And if you're running it on an app, you also have app and screen views. Now GA4 is totally different in that all those things are an event. GA4 is an event-driven analytics package. So everything is an event. Everything is an event. It has an event name like pageview, for example. That's going to be the event name, and it has parameters which modify or describe that event name. So it might be page location, page refer, the page title, things like that. So you can actually have up to 25 parameters per event. One event name, 25 parameters that further describe that event. So it's a very different structure than GA3. And it takes a tiny bit of time to wrap your head around an event-driven analytics. Once you're there, it's like, oh man, this makes so much sense. I don't have to worry about the different hit types. Everything is an event. I just have to figure out which event to use and which parameters to attach to that event name. So let's go through the GA4 event types. And there are 4 main types. The first one is the automatically collected events. You don't have to do anything. Once you install GA4, these get automatically collected, like driving through a toll zone. You've got that RFID thing. It just hits your account for the $2 or whatever for the toll. It's automatic. You don't have to stop. You don't have to do anything. You can just go right through. And in GA4, there are 42 of these automatically collected events. 34 of them are app related, which is kind of interesting because I personally don't do a lot with apps, but GA4 came from app and web. That was the name before GA4 officially launched. And so it was an attempt to get all the measurements from apps and all the measurement from web into one stream. So the app background is really strong in GA4. There's a lot to that. And you can see that here with the automatically collected. 34 of them are app related, but 8 are web related. And that's what I primarily focus on and we'll be talking about here. So some of those automatically collected ones are the page view, the scroll, the session start, things like that. You don't have to do anything. Those things are automatically collected when you install GA4 and start measuring. The next set is the enhanced measurement. So the next set of GA4 events is the enhanced measurement. And there are 6 of these. And when you first set up GA4, these are on automatically. You can turn them off. Actually, you can't turn off page view, but you can turn off scrolls or outbound clicks if you wanted to. But they're there. You configure GA4, and these are right there with you, sending this information on video engagement if you have YouTube, on site search if you have a search bar and people are looking for things on your website, on outbound clicks, things like that. So that's the enhanced measurement, kind of a core function of GA4. The next set of GA4 events is the recommended ones. And these apply to a number of different industries or types of businesses. So there's a set that apply to all properties, regardless of what type of business you are. Here are a set of events that Google thinks would apply to your type of business or your web. And then there are different ones broken out by retail, e-commerce, jobs, local deals, real estate, travel, games, etc. And the interesting thing is that you would think that these are discrete sets, that you have one set of things for retail e-commerce. So let's look at that one. These events all make sense. You're going to add payment information. You're going to add shipping information. You're going to add to cart, add to wish list. So things that you would expect in an e-commerce environment. If we look at the travel set of recommended events, you see that they're identical to the retail e-commerce ones. So it's not like there are unique events for all these different industries. It's just that they may apply to your specific industry. And Google tries to group them together in a way that you can use them on your site. And what they say is, if your site or your app has features or behavior that correspond to these events, like the add to cart, the add to wish list, things like that, then go ahead and use these. Now, these are not automatically collected. Unlike the enhanced measurement ones, these are not automatically collected. They're just, Google is just putting them out there for you to say, hey, go ahead. These are some event types that already exist. Go ahead and use them. The next one, the last set of GA4 event types, is the custom ones. And if you can't find what you're looking for in the recommended events, in the automatically collected, or in the enhanced measurement events, then you can create custom events. You create your own event name. you create your own event parameters. But I will warn you that while this exists, this custom exists, Google tries to steer you away from the custom events as much as possible. So if we look at their documentation on the recommended events, they're saying if you use the recommended events, you're going to have more information in the reports and the UI, and you're going to have more information moving forward at some point in the future than if you use custom events. Now, at this point in time, there's really no difference in the UI between the custom and the recommended events. But I'm going to take Google at their word that you should use recommended events when you can, and I'm going to use them. Okay, so they probably know where GA4 is going. So let's trust them and try as much as possible to use recommended events. Okay. Now let's look at the universal analytics events, the ones that we've set up, that we've been good analysts and we've set them up on our website. So we are about to enter the GA3 casino. What's going to happen with the GA3 setup that we currently have? So you are in luck if in your GA3 environment you have no events whatsoever. So this is one of the saddest screens to me in GA3, but you go into the top events and you see that absolutely no events are being measured. No one has thought about tracking significant user interactions on that website and tracking those as events. So if this is you, hopefully it's not nobody on this call, but if you're auditing a GA3 account and this is what they've got, then you're in luck, because the enhanced measurement events are going to give you way more information than you had in your GA3 setup. In your GA3 setup, you're going to have page views, and this is going to add scrolls, the outbound clicks, a site search, the video engagement, if it's YouTube, file downloads, things like that. So really some basic user interaction information from people interacting on your websites. So if you don't have anything set up in GA3, you will love GA4. You're also in luck if you've done something crazy like this. So this is the event category. This is the total opposite of what we just saw with no events. Here they went absolutely crazy. There's 5,400 event categories in this account. And that just in this property, actually, that makes no sense whatsoever. You know that the event categories, you want those to be the really big, broad buckets, and you want to have maybe 10, maybe 20 event categories overall as the big bucket of user interactions on your website. Having 5,400 is just crazy. This is a site that's out of control, a measurement plan that's out of control. And so if you switch to GA4, you're going to get rid of those 5,400 things that you can't make any sense out of, and you're going to go back to those 6 enhanced measurement events. So you'll have a cleaner, more understandable approach in your property. All right, moving on. You're kinda in luck if you use G-Tag, the global site tag, to run Google Analytics and maybe send ad conversions and things like that to Google Ads. You may not remember, but last August or September, Google sent out emails to just about everybody who had a analytics account and said, hey, now's the time to update to G-Tag. You should be doing that. And we got tons of questions from our clients saying, should we go to G-Tag? We're on GTM. Should we go to G-Tag? And it's like, no, stay on GTM. If you had the older version of analytics, then go to G-Tag. But I was wondering, so why were they pushing G-Tag so much? And the reason is because in October, they launched GA4 officially, and G-Tag works really nicely with GA4. If you have a G-Tag set up already, that translates right into GA4, particularly with the events, which is really great. So let's look at how an event is set up in G-Tag, which you might have done for GA3, for Universal Analytics. Here's the documentation if you really want to dive into it. But basically, you're going to set up an event, and you're going to use the event action. And with events in GA3, we have category, action, and label. So you're going to use the action. You're going to define that up here, and then the event category and the event label. So let's look at an example of this. We're going to hop over to a demo site in just a second here. But if we remember what our GTag event should look like, what I'm going to do is put an event on this Facebook icon. When someone clicks on that, I'm going to send an event to GA3. And here's what that event looks like. So here's what the documentation is like, and here's what it is in real life. GTag event, follow Facebook. The event category is social media GTag. The event label is footer, okay? And if we look at that element, which we'll do momentarily live, you can see what that looks like. On click, I'm going to send this GTag event. So let's take a look at that. If I can get over to it. Where'd it go? There it is. All right, so here's my demo account. A nice coffee shop to keep you perked up and raring to go. So I'm going to scroll down. And there is that Facebook link. So let's look at that. I'm going to right click and inspect it. I'm going to call up the developer console and look at the elements of that. And you can see there's that GTag event that we saw, follow Facebook, etc. So let's hop over to the console. And I'm going to click on the Facebook link. That takes me over to Facebook, which I don't want to go into right now. So I'm going to close that. And now you can see in the console, and what I'm using the Ads for Data Layer Inspector Plus to show this information. But that event showed up, GA4 event, follow Facebook. It fired based on this GTag event that got pushed to the data layer. And GA4 then recognized that and created a GA4 event, sent it over to GA4. And I didn't have to do anything. I'm not setting up that event in GTM. I'm not doing anything other than using the GTag event, using GTag and the GTag event on my site. So if you are using GTag and you've set up events, and maybe you're doing Google Ads conversion tracking that way too, then you're in luck. GA4 will actually recognize those. So back to our webinar here. Hold on, I need to. All right. What I don't like about that approach is that the event action is what becomes the event name in GA4. Now, remember I said earlier, the event category is, in my view, in GA3, the most important thing, the one that you want to use for the big buckets and only have 10 or 20 tracking. So I'm kind of surprised that they don't use the event category for the event name, but they don't. They didn't ask me. No one from Google called me up and said, hey, Fred, what should we do? So whatever, we live with what we have. So they use the event action as the event name, and they store the event category. All right, so that's GTag. Now, your SOL, you're totally out of luck if you use Google Tag Manager. And certainly I live and breathe in Google Tag Manager. It's probably my favorite product. And I'm sure that's true for many of you as well. So if you use Google Tag Manager and you set up all these wonderful events in GTM to track user interactions on your website, client story interactions or errors or file downloads or things like that. If you've set that up in GTM, none of that gets transferred automatically to GA4. So all that hard work you've done in GTM to really track things well, you are totally out of luck. And you just want to close your eyes and go, oh my gosh, why? Why, Google? Why do you recognize GTag and not GTM? But again, nobody from Google called me and asked my opinion on that. We're in the world, we're in their world, so we follow their rules. So the rule you need to think about with your GA3 events is, are you going to reuse them? Are you going to reject them? Or are you going to replace them? So let's walk through that process. The last one, replace, is probably the easiest. So for example, here's that list of from GTM of some of the GA3 events that I was tracking. And you'll notice that file downloads, outbound link click, and YouTube videos, that sounds suspiciously like something on the enhanced measurement side in GA4, right? Indeed, it is. So we have outbound link clicks are tracked automatically in the enhanced measurement. File downloads are tracked automatically, and YouTube videos are tracked automatically as well. And by the way, I did see a question. I'll talk about this very, very briefly. So someone asked, if you don't have YouTube videos on here, will GA4 track it? No, the answer is no. You'd have to use a different, like I've used the HTML5 video tracker to track non-YouTube videos on GA4. So the YouTube videos or the video engagement in GA4 is only for YouTube at this point. Now, that may change at some point because one of the parameters they have is the provider. So you would think that there might be a provider other than YouTube, but right now it's only YouTube. All right, so I know now that I have three GA3 events that I'm just going to replace with the enhanced measurements. Cool, that's great. Makes my life a little bit easier. So now let's follow an example and see what we do with the other events. So the first thing we're going to do is review existing GA3 Universal Analytics events. And I'm going to use the Northwoods website as an example. We track social media interactions in 3 different spots on our website. In the footer, we track if you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. In our blogs, we track if you share that particular blog on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. And then most of our blogs also have a pull quote that we say, hey, this is kind of the essence of this article. Would you like to tweet it? So you can click on that and then it'll get tweeted to your account. So those are the 3 different types of social media interactions we track. And if I look at my GTM container, I can see that I've got a GA event, social media, click to tweet, follow, or share. So 3 different types of events. And what am I going to do with these? What I'm going to do is borrow an approach from Marie Kondo. And I'm going to try to simplify my life. I'm going to say, which of these events actually sparks joy? Which do I want to bring along into GA4? Which represent a significant user interaction on my website that I want to move over to GA4? So in terms of sparking joy, that click to tweet, that sparks a lot of joy to me. If someone is engaged enough with our content to actually click to tweet that little pull quote, that's awesome. I think that's pretty cool. I also really like it when they share a blog. They think the content of the blog is good enough that they're going to share it on Facebook or on LinkedIn or tweet about it or whatever. I think that's great. So that brings me joy too. That middle one, the follow, I'd say, that doesn't really bring me joy. That doesn't really speak to a significant user interaction. We actually don't know if they followed us, if they ended up following us on Facebook. We just know that they left our site and they went to Facebook. So I'm going to reject this one, and I'm going to reuse the click to tweet and the share and move those over to GA4. So now that I know which events, or an example of which events I'm going to move over, I'm going to look at the GA4 recommended events. And just a reminder, we want to look at the recommended events because Google is guiding us to use them as much as possible. We are going to follow their lead, thinking that they know, the roadmap for GA4, so we should use the recommended events to the extent we can. So we will follow along. And by the way, I can never do a presentation without at least 2 images of dogs. So we've now had the second image of a dog. So let's look at the all properties recommended events and see if we can find an event that would fit for the tweet and the share, the Facebook stuff. And sure enough, there is a recommended event called share. Perfect. When a user has shared content, that seems to be exactly what we're looking for. So if we look at the parameters, we have content type and item ID. Okay, so content type might be blog. They're sharing something from a blog. And the item ID would be the actual name of that blog. But what's missing is, how do they share it? Did they share it to Facebook? Did they share it to LinkedIn? Did they click to tweet about it? So we're missing potentially some parameters here. And by total accident, I happen to be looking at the measurement protocol information for GA4. Measurement protocol is a nice place to spend a little bit of time and to dive into what all the events are and what the parameters are. And I just happened to be there and I saw that for the share event, there actually is a parameter called method, the method in which the content is shared. Perfect. That gives me what I'm looking for. So I'm going to share something and I'm either going to share it to Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever. And let's look at what that is. So my third step is to plot that event. The event name is going to be share, and the parameters are going to be the method, share to Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or click to tweet. The content type is going to be blog, and the content ID is going to be blog name. Cool. That's that. We now have some existing GA3 events moving over to GA4. So what do we do next? We have to look in our GTM container and see, can we repurpose, can we reuse our GTM triggers for those events? Absolutely. We have a trigger for click to tweet, a trigger for share. We don't have to touch those triggers at all in this particular instance. You may have to, but in this case, we don't have to touch that at all. So now we're going to create the GA4 event. And this presupposes that I already have the GA4 configuration tag set up in GTM. In other words, I've already installed GA4 on my website. So the event is going to use the GA4 configuration, that one that I'd set up previously. My event name is going to be share. The parameters are going to be, the content type is going to be blog. And in our particular case, the only place where like that share to Facebook exists is on the blog. So I'm going to hard code that to blog. The item ID is going to be the page path, so the URI that we're on. And then the method is the click classes, and that's share Facebook, share Twitter, share LinkedIn, etc. And then finally, the trigger is going to be the two triggers that we just saw. Perfect. So now we're going to test it. And to do that, we go into one of the best parts of GA4, the best parts when it's working, which is not all the time, but the debug view. And so let's look at that live. I'll close this out. All right, so we are going to go to Northwoods, and the way we're going to, here's the analytics with the debug view. You notice that there's nothing happening right now. I'm going to use the GA debug and turn it on. And now information should start being sent over to the debug view in analytics. And let's just go down to a blog. And let's look at one here, for example. Here's the share to Facebook. So let's click on that. We actually don't want to go into Facebook. Let's also share to Twitter. What the heck? And let's do that click to tweet. Okay, so the user interactions that we want to track. Let's go over to analytics now in the debug view. And look, we've got a lot of information coming up now. We've had some page view, some user engagement, which happens when the user is on the site for more than 10 seconds. We also have some shares here. And if we look at the share, we can see they're summarized over here. If we click on that share, we can see the parameters that got sent along with that share event name. So the content type is blog. All those three things that we just clicked on were all part of the blog. Our item ID is going to be that one blog article that we were on. And the method, there should be different ones here. Yeah, we shared to Facebook, we shared to Twitter, and we did a quote click to tweet. So that's how it shows up in the debug view, and we can make sure that it's working that way, which is great. So let's go back to our slideshow. And in case the debug view didn't work, I did screenshots here, but we saw that live. So that's good. So that's only part of the story. We have three parameters that we added to that event name, right? The content type, the method, and the item ID. Those they kind of exist, but they don't really show up until you register. You have to register the parameters that you're using. And the way you do that is in your custom definitions, create custom dimensions. Let's look at that live here. So we're in the custom definitions, and because I've already created them, they show up here. Content type, item ID, and method already show up here. It usually will take 24 hours after you register a parameter, and you do that by clicking on the create custom dimensions, and then you can give it the name, you can give it the description, and then you can choose some of the parameters that have already existed. So I normally start by choosing some of these parameters like video duration, and then naming the name and the description. But they exist here, and that means that when I look at some of the events, like click to tweet, I'm going to have those parameters, the item ID, the GA session ID. Yeah, so here we got the content type, the method, and the item ID. These three things won't show up in the UI until you register the parameters. So that's a key thing that you have to do when you're setting this up. All right, back to here. So that's to register the parameters. And then the other thing on here, in case the screen didn't work, I did a screenshot. The other thing is marking some of those as conversions. Not everything, not all the shares would be a conversion, but if we look at our real-time view, our debug view, you'll see that there are some that are a conversion. That's what that kind of orange flag means. There's one over here. So how did that get set up? And that's actually one of the cool things about GA4 is how you can create conversions based on events, based on subset of events. And let's look at an example of that. So let's look at the click to tweet. We're going to create an event. And so the click to tweet is an event name that I created based on, let's actually show you what that looks like. You can call it whatever you want. But you can then set up conditions to make that event live. So the event name was going to be share, and the method was going to be the quote click to tweet. So I was able to take an event, create another event based on a subset of that event, and then make that a conversion just by clicking on this mark as a conversion. So instead of setting up a goal in GA4, you set up a conversion, typically on one of the events that you've created. All right, so back to our PowerPoint. Hope this is making sense so far. So here's how you create an event. Now in this example, I'm using capital letters. I typically don't do that anymore. I think it's best to use lowercase across the board, and instead of a dash, use an underscore. Like this one, event underscore name, or actually I probably shouldn't do that either. But at any rate, it's best to use lowercase. So just something I've learned since I created this slide. So we talked about marking that as a conversion, and that's kind of the process. So that's a small set of the events that I have on my website of the user interactions that I'm tracking, but I really have to go through there and look at, okay, which ones actually make sense? Which ones spark joy? Which ones do I want to move from GA3 to GA4? And if you don't have GA3, you still go through the same process. You still want to think, what are the user interactions that are really important to me on the website besides those 6 enhanced measurement ones? It might be filling out a form. It might be downloading, well, that would be tracked. But filling out a form is a big one, of course. So you have to think through that and then choose the GA4 events that most make sense for that, and then corresponding parameters, and register those parameters. So that's kind of the process. I hope that makes sense. And I know we're coming up a little bit on the end, so I have time for just a couple more thoughts, and then we'll take some questions. So first of all, with GA4, less is more on GA4. And I was at a webinar that Google gave last November, and they were talking about their whole approach to GA4. And they were saying, in Universal Analytics, if you're not in there every day, it's overwhelming. There are over 100 reports in there. If you're a newbie, if you're a casual user, it's really hard to remember, okay, where the heck is that report that I'm really interested in? What they tried to do with GA4 is make it much simpler for the casual user, which drives people like me and probably people like you who are in GA a lot, it drives us mad because all that information that we were used to is not there readily available. But for the casual user, which is probably, you know, a bigger percentage of people using GA, GA4 actually works quite well. And if you are a power user, if you are used to doing a lot in GA, then you've got to go into the analysis hub and set up your own reports, or more likely do it through Google Data Studio. That's where the power is going to come through. It's not going to be in the UI. For power users, it's not going to be in the UI. It's going to be outside of GA4, at least the way it's configured right now. And so if I had one shot to set up GA, would I do GA3 or GA4? I would probably do GA4 because it is closer to a set it and forget it than GA3 is. But I wouldn't recommend that. I wouldn't recommend just one shot and only setting up GA4. What we're recommending right now is to double tag your site. Keep running GA3 because that's where, particularly if you've been running it already, everybody knows GA3. That's where your data is. That's where you should keep your main analysis in. But run GA4 side by side, double tag it, and start collecting data and start getting used to the interface so that you will be ready as GA4 takes over the world a year or 2 years from now or whatever. So that's my recommendation for right now. And Adam, I think we have time for questions. I actually went over a little bit, but left some time for questions.
Yeah, so we have tons of questions. Thank you so much, Fred. So what I'm going to recommend we do is kind of a
Is kind of a what? I can't hear you, Adam. Adam, I'm not hearing you. Oh, okay, so it's not just me. All right, so without Adam, I guess I will read the questions. Oh, Jenny Hayden, how are you? All right, so if we want to modify the default nomenclature, so Godlos asks, let me move this over so I can read a little bit better. If we want to modify the default nomenclature of the auto-collected events, is it possible using the data? No, you can't change those auto-collected events. You can't change the name of those. Are user properties included in that 25 parameter limit? That's a great question. That actually shows up in, well, yes, the answer would be yes. But let's see if we go over here. If we look at our custom definitions. So you want to look at the quota information, and you have 50 for event scoped and 25 for user scoped. So I think that's, David, your question? No, okay. So Catalyst, we got that. David, the crucial question is still unclear to me. In a common enterprise analytics center, all right, so David's question is really critical. So he's talking about a GA3 implementation where there's hundreds of data layer pushes. There's lots of tracking of user interactions on there, and it's like, how do you move to GA4 in a reasonable time frame? You don't. That's why you double tag it. So continue, in this case, particularly David, you would continue to run GA3 as your main analysis. That's where you've got all the data layer push information going into GA3 and through GTM. So keep that going, but then look at, all right, what are some of the most important ones that I want to track in GA4? And I'm doing that for a couple of my large clients that have very complex hospital systems that have very complex tracking systems set up. And we're kind of going through, okay, what are we going to move over? What are the things that maybe aren't as valuable or whatever? So there's no magic answer. There's no automatic way to move the things over. It's really, you really have to sit down and say, okay, what do I like? What sparks joy? What makes sense to move over? The other thing is that you may be tempted to just replicate that event category, event label, event action over in GA4. Don't do that. That's a short-term fix that I think will lead to long-term headaches. Okay, so Stephen Rao, we finished that one. We asked about that. Jenny. We never had GA3, so I'm learning GA4 and hitting that issue that action equal, what happened to it? There we go. That action equal name. I manage 4 sides instead of one that come for it, but now the I'm probably. How can I get my GA4 to identify by data stream? So that's an excellent question. You could probably, I mean, the way to do that would be through an event parameter and it's going to be a custom event parameter, most likely. I don't think it's a recommended one. But I think you would identify it in there. I'm not quite sure how I would do that yet, but that's a path that I would go down, Jenny. And feel free to reach out to me afterwards. We can talk about this maybe over lunch. I've not seen you in a long time. All right, isn't item ID a reserved parameter for e-commerce? No, it's not reserved. As a matter of fact, you can use the parameter. So that's a very good question, actually. You can use the parameters and you should reuse the parameters because you have a limit of 50, right? So to the extent you can, you should use them, but it should be the same thing across the board. So in our example, we're not running e-commerce. So I can repurpose item ID, even though that is an e-commerce event or an e-commerce parameter. I'm fine. I'm not going to confuse it with some SKU number from an e-commerce thing or whatever. Okay, have you run across issues where GA4 causes a tracking issue with UA? For example, when I have GA4 active AdSense. Interesting. No, Megan, I have not run across that issue. I've not run across any issue with GA4 causing a tracking issue with UA. The only thing that I sometimes run into is getting into the debug view, which wouldn't affect that. So I have not seen that. I apologize. All right, what happens if you put a custom property on a recommended event? Kevin, thank you. Great stuff, Fred, thanks. So you mean a custom parameter? That's fine. I mean, try to use a recommended event, but if the parameters that exist don't fit, then go ahead and use a custom parameter. And I do that. I still try to use the recommended event, but custom parameters, you're tracking your website. It's your website, it's your measurement. You want to track it best, so use custom parameters. Outside of the events, what are your thoughts on marketing attribution, data-driven attribution, GA4? Would we lose this information in GA4? Yeah, Riani, I'm not even sure how to answer it. It's such the whole thing with marketing attribution and data-driven attribution is just, it's been murky for years and it's just getting murkier and murkier. So GA4 has some machine learning things that may help with that supposedly, but I don't think it's the end all be all. I may be missing something there, but so not a great answer there, sorry. So Nandan, any recommendations for changes in the data layer? No, not really. Data layer is going to stay pretty much the same between GA3 and GA4. What are some tips for GA3 to GA4? I have a blog post, not that I'm trying to push my stuff, but so here's, but I will push it, what the heck. And this is a little bit out of date, but so this one, GA4 setup tips, I think is actually, it's steps that I follow when I'm working on a GA4 events, a GA4 property. I set it up using the enhanced measurements, and then I do some more things which are outlined here. So I would say those would be some tips. All right, can you use the attributes in the data layer that were originally used to populate parameters? Yes. So if you're using a data layer push and it did event label and action, you can use that to populate parameters in GA4. I'm helping a client do that right now. Again, I wouldn't call those event action, event category, event label in GA4, but I can grab those. Those are data layer variables. They're accessible to me via GTM. I can put them in as a parameter in my GA4 tag event tag. So yeah, absolutely. What will GA4 mean for, so I skipped one. How easy have you found it to train end users on reading, self-serving the event setups? End users, no, I have not found it easy. Yeah, so I would say probably not.
Hey,
What
Fred,
will,
can you hear
yeah,
me now?
I
I just wanted to
can,
see.
Adam. Welcome
Sorry, yeah.
back.
I don't
Woohoo.
know what's been going on. I've been trying to moderate and keep up with you behind the scenes. We are at our time.
Okay.
So what I'm going to recommend we do is I will give you a download of all of the questions that remain. So if anyone has any questions they haven't asked, now is your time. We can only see the ones that are in the Zoom Q&A. So put them in there. And then Fred, what I'll do is I'll give you a spreadsheet of all of the questions. And if you want, you're more than welcome to, if you have time, to maybe jot some short answers and give it to me as like a PDF document, and you could post it in the Slack group. So, but really appreciate you taking the time, giving all of your, I knew you had wisdom. See, look at all these questions you're answering. So sorry for my technical Zoom difficulties, but thank you so much for doing this. Thanks everyone for attending, and we will try to get more answers to these questions posted in the Slack group, and we'll post the recording. And Fred, if you want, you are also welcome after I post the recording to post the slides if you want to share the
Yep,
slides.
absolutely. Be happy to do that. Adam, thank you so much. Everybody, all the attendees, thanks a lot. I love talking about this stuff. So reach out to me on LinkedIn and Twitter, which is, by the way, let's see if Adam, if we can get this in the slide, hold on, or in the deck. Where is that? Yep. Right there.
There you go. Okay, well, thanks everyone for attending. Have a wonderful week. I just sent an invite out for June 15th, where we're going to have another GA related session. So be on the lookout for that, and we will talk soon. Thanks so much, everyone.
All right. Thanks all.
Okay, bye-bye.